What do I mean by that? So, before we get into that, if you do the social media thing, like, follow, subscribe, share, or whatever below this video, that would be appreciated. Also, if you're here, say hi. Say where you're from, say what's going on. If you have any questions too, post them below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So, with that said, today's video of Start Your Morning with the Coach is all about measurement. And Peter Drucker famously said, you can't improve what you don't measure. So how does this work in our lives? Well, when you have the art of measurement correctly, you're tracking the right things for the right reasons at the right time, right? That is how I have interpreted it, and it's worked really well for me. So when you have those three things, aligned, where you're tracking the right thing for the right reasons at the right time, that's when you get to see improvement. And that's I think the good art of management, either in business or for your life. So things that people typically tend to measure in a very simple way is weight, salary, time with family and friends, time spent on hobbies. So it's time, it's money, it's accomplishments. And the question for you is, are these things that people tend to track, or maybe you're tracking right now, getting you where you want to be? So if the answer is no, then you're probably not tracking the right things, or maybe it's not for the right reasons. And this is something we all kind of stumble upon, because if you think about it, there's so much noise. There's so many things we could be paying attention to, we could be tracking, but sometimes it leads us astray. So, for example, when I was working in tech years ago, and this happened nearly everywhere where I worked, internships and, the major milestones in my career, where you'd have some type of support function, and people would be tracking the amount of support tickets you closed, right? And if you've been on the receiving end of that type of focus, you have cruddier customer service. You have people avoid the deep, bigger problems, because it's all about speed. It's all about, getting things off your plate. It's all about churning through as many things as possible. And what that happens inside an organization is, if you're focused on the easy wins, you tend to avoid the big issue problems that will help alleviate all the other types of things, So that's something to think about when you're trying to get into better shape. If all you focus on is weight, it can be kind of tricky, because if you're building up muscle, you might be gaining weight but getting a better build. And so that measurement of how heavy am I, or how light am I every morning could really mess with your head and say, hey, I'm not making any progress, when you're actually building muscle mass, which is heavier than fat, and, actually getting more fit. So, these two different types of examples, basically show that, sometimes the obvious thing, I should just measure that, is not the right thing to measure, right? And again, this goes back to the art of how are you improving, how are you tracking things in a way that's going to serve you. So a couple of ideas that I think really work well, having seen it in corporate America and clients when they're tracking things, is, how do you... So first off is to reflect on the numbers you're tracking, right? So if you're hey, in the weight example, hey, I'm getting heavier, and I was expecting to get lighter, but I'm doing all this work, this isn't really working. You need to take a step back and say, okay, what's really going on here? Why is this increasing? If I'm doing the diet, if I'm doing the exercise, if I'm doing everything correctly, what's going on here? What's maybe a more significant measurement, right? So maybe it's, maybe it's not weight, maybe it's, your BMI. Maybe it's, a more quantitative, how do I look, or do I fit in jeans that are a size smaller, right? So, a couple of, find a different measurement that might actually reflect the truth a bit more. The second thing is add multiple measurements, right? So Maybe it's all of those things combined. Like if you're tracking your waist size, if you're tracking your BMI and your weight and your calories and your workouts, if you're consistent in tracking that and in following through on your plan there, consistency could be another measurement. So how consistent am I working out, eating right, doing the right things? Make that weight that average. So, when I was training for marathons, I would do a 3-day average of my weight because it would fluctuate, right? I would do, did I accomplish my, running 5 days a week? And then that was really all I tracked. And surprise, surprise, it didn't matter how much I would eat on the nutrition side, I would always lose weight because I was burning so many calories training for that marathon. So that's how having a couple of different measurements can actually improve the quality of the outcome you want. And the final thing to think about is to just iterate. It's start, get some data, think, how can I make this better, or how can I shift it around, or what would be a better way to measure it? Because sometimes you just don't know until you start. So, really think about, when I started running marathons, I was just tracking weight, and it's really hard to train when that's your focus. Or, so I used to track time it took to run, which, being a very slow and experienced runner, whose whole goal for the marathon was to just survive to cross the finish line, I switched it to miles. So tracking miles versus time in that instance. One, I stopped beating myself up because I wasn't quick enough to meet whatever pace. Two, it kept me more consistent, so I wasn't killing myself, one, on the runs, so I'd be out for 3 days. And two, you get this sense of accomplishment. Like, oh, I ran my 4 miles today. It took me, 15 hours, which, is an exaggeration. But, I accomplished it. I was able to either walk or run. Some days you're so beat up, especially when you're new at running, where you'd walk half of it just because it was a hot day or whatever reason. But the miles were done. Check. I could feel good. And I still was able to crank up the miles as the training progressed. So that's how that iteration idea can work. So I hope you found this fun and interesting. Really reflect on what you're measuring. And if you're not measuring anything at all, what would be something that's really significant that you could start to track that would lead to a greater outcome in your life? And I know, that sometimes it's scary. I tend to resist that type of tracking myself. But, so you got technology, track your steps, track your, calories burned or whatnot. Just, start doing it in a way that works for you, and you'll see bigger improvements. So, hope you guys love this video. I love doing it for you. Again, like, share, follow this video wherever you're seeing it. Ask questions below. I'll get back to you. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Take care. Go out there with more joy, growth, and impact in your life.